Hey bro, what's going on? Alright, so here's the deal. We've got a fresh patch for No Man's Sky. The patch is focused on a handful of areas where players have been running into real friction. Memory and rendering, some platform-specific hangs, and a grab bag of Corvette and Expedition quirks. A lot of these fixes are small in isolation, but together they smooth out gameplay in ways that make an update feel like an actual quality of life leap, rather than just another number. The most obvious headline is the memory and graphics work. Targeted optimizations for consoles and Vulkan-based PC setups that shave video memory usage and tidy up rendering paths that were causing artifacts and crashes. If you've been playing on a lower VRAM console or an older GPU on PC, recently you might have noticed stutters when big scenes loaded, textures popping in late, or occasional glitches where geometry or UI elements failed to appear properly. Those symptoms track with video memory pressure. When the engine needs more GPU memory than is comfortably available, it starts juggling resources, unloading and reloading assets, and that can lead to crashes or visual strangeness. The engineers on this patch went after a few key places where memory spikes were occurring and tightened things up. That looks like reduced texture thrash, fewer rendering artifacts in certain high-load scenes, and a general reduction in crashes triggered by memory allocation failures. On consoles, the note specifically mentioned graphics memory improvements, and that matters because consoles are fixed hardware environments where every megabyte counts. Consoles don't have the same flexibility as many PC rigs to compensate for memory spikes, so optimizations here translate directly to smoother frame rate and reduced chance of freezes. One of the weird behaviors players reported, and which the patch addresses, was shader or model pop-in in the space anomaly and in Corvette-related scenes. Those scenes combine high-detail assets with lots of background systems, and when memory pressure hits, things that should be rendered can suddenly disappear or reappear. The memory fixes reduce the likelihood of those visible hiccups and made transitions between zones feel cleaner. There was also a very specific platform hang on Xbox tied to the pause menu. That's one of those rare but infuriating bugs where the game stops responding to player input when you open the pause menu, forcing a hard reset or long wait. The patch includes a fix that prevents that freeze, which is huge for anyone who had to deal with interrupted sessions or lost multiplayer connections because of that pause hang. These kinds of platform-specific fixes usually come from focused repros and telemetry, particularly if they're thread deadlock or resource contention that only surfaces under certain timing conditions or hardware drivers. The fact that it was isolated and fixed suggests the team tracked down the precise code path and added the necessary guards or timing corrections to prevent it from reoccurring. Vulkan and rendering improvements are another piece of the puzzle. Vulkan is performant, but also very particular about memory management and driver interactions. On Vulkan-based PCs, players had reported rare crashes and rendering glitches, doors in the anomaly failing to display, Corvette placement visual errors, and occasional frame time spikes. Those were tied to how the renderer handled certain buffers and descriptors with Vulkan's API. The patch improves Vulkan memory usage patterns and squares up race conditions or mismanaged resources that could cause those oddities. For people running Vulkan, the result should be a more robust render path and fewer what the heck was that moments when geometry or UI decides to play hide and seek. Corvettes received quite a few targeted fixes as well. The new Corvette systems and expeditions introduced a lot of mechanics: parts, rewards, storage containers, and UI filters. Complexity breeds edge cases, and players started running into issues where Corvette parts weren't being retrieved properly from their boxes, sale values for some modules were incorrect, or filters misbehaved when buying and selling parts and relics. Those feel small until they affect your haul or your progression logic. The patch irons out these inconsistencies. Parts that were stuck in limbo should be retrievable again, module sale values are adjusted to their intended balance, and shop filters will behave more predictably, so you're not missing crucial items when trading. Corvette placement and rendering glitches were also included in the fixes. That ties back into the rendering work and suggests there were both server-side placement issues and client-side visual problems that needed coordinated fixes. Performance saw attention beyond just memory. One surprising but meaningful change was improved handling when rendering large schools of fish. That sounds niche, but aquatic areas and planet-side streams can have a ton of small entities to simulate and draw. When those are rendered inefficiently, they tax CPU and GPU in a way that shows up as stutters or micro freezes. Optimizing those systems not only makes oceans look better and run smoother, but it reduces background load that could otherwise contribute to larger frame hiccups when combined with other heavy systems like Corvette rendering or dense base building. There are also a number of rare crash fixes scattered throughout the release notes. These are the sorts of fixes players rarely see but are very grateful for when they stop losing progress. Some crashes were tied to multiplayer interaction, others to very specific sequences like entering a Corvette hangar and immediately triggering a UI action or loading into a system with particular procedural combinations. The patch clamps down on these race conditions and null-check blind spots, so sessions that used to end in a sudden exit will be more stable. The fixes probably won't eliminate every single edge case crash. Complex games like this always have new combos to test, but it's a clear step towards stability, and a sign the devs are watching telemetry and player reports. Now, about the feel of the patch rather than the tech. When small memory leaks are closed and render pipelines are polished, the player experience becomes more consistent. You stop wondering whether a weird flicker means your save is corrupt. You stop hesitating to enter certain areas because you remember a crash that happened there a week ago. That psychological confidence is underrated. Players become more willing to explore and test new systems when the baseline experience is stable. Corvette missions and expeditions are a bigger part of that equation because they're intended to be long, multi-stage engagements. If the game freezes or drops items mid-expedition, that's a huge frustration. Addressing Corvette mod retrieval, sales, and rewards is therefore not just a UI patch. It's a quality of life improvement for content that's supposed to be rewarding and replayable. There are a few subtleties in these fixes that are worth calling out. One is the interplay between server-side authoritative logic and client-side presentation. Some Corvette placement problems, for example, were likely the result of desynchronization between what the server thought the Corvette's state was and what the client expected to show. Fixing that required touching both the placement code and the UI that reflects it. Another subtlety is the difference between reducing memory usage and changing memory allocation timing. You might not feel a change in absolute map quality or texture resolution, but you will see fewer spikes where assets unload and reload unexpectedly. That's the kind of invisible work that makes a game feel smoother without necessarily changing the look dramatically. It's also worth noting what the patch doesn't try to do. This isn't a content expansion or a balance overhaul. There aren't sweeping changes to core mechanics or to resource economy in general. Instead, it's surgical. Find the most painful rough edges that harm large numbers of players and remove them so the existing content works as intended. That's a healthy sign. It shows the developers are prioritizing a stable foundation over adding more to a shaky base, which is the responsible move for longevity. For people who track crash reports and community threads, there are a few probable ripple effects. Console players on older hardware should see fewer memory-related crashes and better frame rate stability in graphically heavy scenes. Vulkan users on PC should see fewer rendering errors and rare crashes related to descriptor and buffer management. Corvette owners and expedition runners should see more consistent outcomes when it comes to module spawning, rewards, and UI filters while trading or retrieving parts. And across the board, fewer rare crashes mean people will keep their progress and not be surprised with abrupt quits during critical moments. From a technical perspective, this patch follows a pattern that games of this scale often use. A reactive pass that targets regressions introduced by recent major features. When a big update adds new vehicles, new rendering features, and expanded UI systems, it inevitably interacts with existing code in unpredictable ways. The next round of patches tends to be about stitching those interactions together, removing race conditions, and reining in resource usage. What this particular update does well is focus on both core engine areas, memory and Vulkan, and the higher level systems, Corvette, UI filters, expedition rewards, so the fixes are comprehensive rather than piecemeal. There will always be remaining edge cases. Rare crashes reported, as it only happens under these exact conditions, are tricky because reproducing them requires matching timing, hardware, and player behavior precisely. Those are the kind of bugs that, while fixed for a large proportion of players with this update, may still appear for a tiny fraction. But the key thing is, each subsequent fix like this reduces the surface area where those edge cases can hide. And the more consistent the core build becomes, the easier it is for future content to integrate cleanly without causing regression. If you're thinking about how this affects your content or playstyle, picture your long-form sessions having a smoother baseline. Streams and recorded runs will have fewer name game crashed moments, and time spent troubleshooting is reduced. Corvette missions will more reliably deliver the rewards and interactions you expected. And when you fly into highly populated aquatic zones or thickly built bases, you should see fewer micro stutters and more consistent rendering behavior. It's the kind of patch that, while not flashy, ends up making the whole experience feel more professional and less like you're wrestling the engine every time you try to do something cool. On the social side, patches like this also tend to calm down the more frustrated corners of the community because players who are losing progress or encountering non-reproducible freezes finally get relief. That shifts the conversation back toward exploration and creativity, which is the best outcome for a game that lives or dies by the joy of discovering new corners of its universe. So yeah, the update is small in headline but meaningful in practice. Memory management tightened, Vulkan and rendering made more robust, a nasty Xbox pause hang squashed, Corvette and expedition behaviors corrected so items and filters behave properly, aquatic rendering optimized, and a batch of rare crash fixes to shore up stability. Expect the game to feel steadier and fewer weird visual and progression edge cases to crop up. It's the kind of behind-the-scenes maintenance that pays dividends the next time you decide to load a massive, complex save and wander off system for hours.